Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Kara Kaikini. I'm the Executive Director of the Maine State Breastfeeding Coalition, and I'm so excited to be here again. This is our 5th storytelling event that we have had, and it gets better and better every year. I want to start out playing a game called Two Truths and a Lie. How many of you have played Two Truths and a Lie before? So these won't be personal truths and a lie, but I'm going to give 3 statements. 2 of those will be true, 1 will be a lie. The first statement is that the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends exclusive breast milk feeding for the first 6 months of a baby's life and continued breastfeeding for 2 years based on a large body of evidence. Second statement is that 60% of new parents are not able to meet their infant feeding goals. Third statement is that breastfeeding is super easy. Which one do you think is a lie? Yeah, I think we all know. And we're going to hear some pretty amazing stories tonight that will address some of that as well. So based on those 2 truths, that there are recommendations to feed human milk, and 60% of parents are having a really hard time meeting those goals, the Maine State Breastfeeding Coalition is here. We are a 501c3 nonprofit with an incredible board of directors and volunteers that help us reach our mission, which is to help reduce the barriers and the challenges that parents are facing when they are trying to feed their babies. We do that through education, advocacy, and connection. And the way that we are offering connection opportunities is through bi-monthly meetings for professionals who are working with the families. We offer events like this. We have a strong social media presence. We have email newsletters that we send out. We also have a new directory called Zip Milk for people to find lactation support, and a new support group directory. That's a statewide directory of support groups around the state. As far as education goes, we offer bi-monthly educational webinars that are also recorded and available on our website to view. We offer other educational opportunities. We also, this last year, were really busy on workplace support initiatives, where we created a returning to work toolkit for the employees who are returning to work after having a baby and wanting to meet their goals of breast milk feeding. We also created a toolkit. These were in partnership with Maine Health Let's Go program. We created a toolkit for the employers, for the workplaces to know how to best support their employees when they come back to work. We have a workplace recognition program to recognize those workplaces that are doing that. And the first one we recognize is actually the town of Brunswick. So yay for Brunswick. We also created 4 videos that demonstrate why it's important to offer workplace support and how places like LL Bean and Allagash Brewing and Community Concepts in Norway, how they've all been able to make that happen. So we're really excited about all the workplace support we've offered. And as far as advocacy goes, there's no shortage of opportunities to be advocating for new families. And we were busy this spring up at the State House advocating for legislation to require Medicaid reimbursement for lactation providers and Medicaid reimbursement for doulas, and also to keep the paid family medical leave program alive and strong. And you'll be hearing about more opportunities to advocate for new families as the months and years go on as well. So stay tuned. If you're not already receiving our email newsletter, you can sign up for that. We also have an equity and lactation education fund, and that is something that helps pay for training opportunities for folks in marginalized and underrepresented communities to support the folks in their communities. And there are other opportunities for you to support us, either by volunteering or through donating more of your very generous funds. So we really appreciate it. And without further ado, let's get started with our night of stories. Emily Elting, our new board president, is going to MC the evening. So let's welcome Emily.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. As Kara said, my name's Emily Elting. I am really honored to be the MC tonight. 3 years ago, I stood on a stage very similar to this one, and I shared my story of my lucky leap day baby and our very intense NICU week together. And after that time, I was so impressed with the people that I met and the mission of the MSBC that I very quickly became a board member, and earlier this year became our board president. So I'm really proud to be here, really excited about this night. I love stories. I'm the person who immediately asks everyone for their birth story. I love hearing about everyone's babies, and I'm also someone who finds ways to cry in rooms with strangers all the time. I also know that that's not how everyone is. And so some people are going to hear maybe hard moments from the stories tonight, and that's going to be difficult. Some people are going to hear happy moments or triumphant moments, and that might feel hard too. I know we will also laugh together. So whatever feelings, whatever experiences you have tonight in this room, they're all super welcome. So thank you for being here. So our first storyteller learned to trust her instincts alongside her infant son. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Amanda Blaine Grenet.
I've always known that I wanted to be a mother, but in my early 30s, instead of a partner to start a family with, I had a terrible sleep problem. I would wake up dozens of times every night, and I had no idea why. I finally found a promising-looking treatment, but it was going to take years, and I was really intimidated by starting that process. But I knew that if I didn't get my sleep in order and my life back on track, that there's no way I would get the chance to bear my own child. So I went ahead with it, and finally, 6 years later, my sleep was back on track. At that point, I was in my early 40s. So I made the really difficult decision of going ahead with having a baby on my own with a sperm donor. I have a beautiful son named Solomon now. And maybe you saw me come in. I also have an amazing husband, Benjamin, and you might have noticed that my son looks like a miniature replica of my husband. So you might be thinking, how could that? I did not meet Benjamin at the sperm bank. How I got from purchasing sperm from the Seattle Sperm Bank to 6 months later being engaged to be married to a wonderful man and being pregnant with our baby, that's not the story I'm going to tell tonight. This story picks up with, there I am, a new mother. I have a perfect son. He is healthy. Everything's going perfectly, except my nipples hurt. I had no idea that breastfeeding was going to be so painful. All those years of wanting to be a mother, I didn't even think about breastfeeding. I just assumed that I would breastfeed my son because I wanted that closeness. Solomon was healthy and thriving, though, so I just kind of curled my toes every time I latched him on, and I grit my teeth, and I kept going. When he was 8 weeks old, we took him to meet his pediatrician for the first time, which I was a little bit nervous about it because we do some weird things as parents. Like in the hospital, they say never sleep with your baby in the bed, and I knew the doctor would ask us about that. We had our baby in our bed, but I was going to be able to reassure her that the baby had his own corner, and there was no way that any of us could roll on top of him. There's only two of us, me and my husband. Not that weird, yeah. No offense, So I was nervous about that, but mostly I was actually just really excited because every time we would introduce Solomon to someone, they would fall in love with him because he was already, at 8 weeks old, he was already smiling and laughing, and he loved connecting with people. So I was excited to kind of show off my cute baby. So we get to the doctor's office. The nurse comes in, she takes the baby's vitals, and then she says, "The doctor will be right in." So we have a little time together. We do what we always do when it's the three of us together. We dance and sing. My name is Solomon. I like to dance. I like to hang out with my parents. The doctor comes in. She doesn't make eye contact with me. She reaches out, shakes my hand. tells me her name, and says, "How do you feel about giving your baby formula?" I stumbled backwards. When I heard those words, what I heard was, "You are starving your baby." And it was such an emergency that he needed immediate supplementation. He needed more food than I was providing. My body was failing him. I felt like a complete failure, and I felt so embarrassed. Like, here I was, 43 years old, having my first baby. I had been preparing for this for years and years and years, and the baby was starving. She told us we had to come back a week later to make sure that his weight gain was on track. We went home, and instead of giving him formula like she suggested, we reached out to friends and kind strangers, and we got donor milk. And we started a grueling regime of triple feeding, which you might be thinking, I thought single feeding an infant takes a long time. Triple feeding takes more than 3 times as much. I didn't time it, but basically you nurse your baby, you breastfeed your baby, and then you give your baby a bottle of supplemental milk or formula, and then you use a breast pump to get more milk and also to give the message to your breast to produce more milk later. They told us you can do this for maybe 48 hours, 72 hours if you really stick with it, because as soon as you finish one cycle, you have to start again around the clock. 24 hours a day. At 72 hours, Solomon was really responding well to having more milk, but my milk supply was nowhere near what he needed. I was only producing about half of what he was consuming at that time, and it didn't feel like a choice. It was like, I'm not going to give up, so I just decided to keep going for the rest of the week until we got to the doctor. At that 1-week appointment, we learned that the week before he had been at the 4th percentile for his age. The doctor hadn't told us that. In 1 week, he had gone up 3 percentage points, so he was now at the 7th percentile, which was, it was in the right direction, but definitely I was like, we're going to keep going with this. There's no way we're going to slow down. So I decided to keep going with triple feeding for another week. I would set an alarm several times in the night to wake up, and my husband and my baby would both be sleeping. And I would sit on the edge of the bed with the light on, audiobook, using the breast pump, squeezing my breast to try to get more milk out. I did this so much that I got tendinitis in my left wrist. Solomon's weight kept going up, so we were on the right track. I just kept going, and I'm really grateful that my husband was supportive and did all the, there's so many dishes when you're triple feeding. All the bottles, all the parts have to be cleaned every day, multiple times. Kept going, his weight kept going up. One day I went to the fridge to prepare Solomon's bottle, and I noticed that there were already 2 bottles of milk there. I didn't need to defrost another bag of donor milk. I hadn't used a bag of donor milk actually in 24 hours, and I realized that I had enough. I had done it. It took 2 months. Hallelujah. I was so grateful and so proud that I could produce enough milk for my son, and actually enough to donate to some other families at that point. But the struggle continued, because at that point, Solomon was refusing to breastfeed at all. I would offer him my breast. He would suck, and then he would throw his head back, arch his body away from me, and start crying. I had been gathering love for 2 decades, my whole adult life, to give to this baby. When he rejected my breast like that, when he rejected my nurturing, it felt like I was being rejected as a mother. It was devastating. But I continued to try to get him to latch multiple times a day because I knew that if we could get to the other side, there would be so many benefits for our family. It would be so much simpler to just feeding would be so much simpler, going on outings, we could actually leave the house, and that I would have that closeness that I was longing for. We went on a trip. We went to the Pacific Northwest, where my husband's family is from, and where we have a lot of friends. And a friend out there recommended a book that I read where I learned that our family does not have any of the risk factors that make it dangerous for parents to sleep in the bed with their baby. So that night, instead of putting him in his own section, I just let him follow his instincts, which were to be close to me. Since I'd read that book, now I was no longer scared of rolling over onto him. In the middle of the night, I feel a soft little hand on my chest. I'm half asleep, and then suddenly I feel him latch onto my breast, and he starts nursing. He's 5 months old at this point. He cannot crawl. Somehow, in his sleep, in the dark, he has scooted over to where I am and started breastfeeding. I was so grateful that I did not have to get up and turn on a light and put the pump on, which, by the way, the pump hurt until I learned actually from Maine Mothering Company, thank you, Paula, that I had how to get the right flange size. But for months I had been pumping with the wrong flange size. It was just like so uncomfortable. Didn't have to get up and give him a bottle. My husband could keep sleeping. I was so grateful. In the morning, offered him my breast. Again, he refused to breastfeed. So when he was awake, he would not nurse. A couple weeks later, we're still on our trip. A friend who I hadn't seen since I was pregnant came to visit us, and this is the Pacific Northwest, so it was very gray and dark and rainy outside. There's nothing to do except hang out in our bed. So she's lying down in the bed facing me. I'm lying down on my side. We've got Solomon in between us. She's meeting Solomon for the first time. Pretty soon it's time to feed him, so I do what I always do. I offer him my breast, suck, suck. He throws his head back, arches his body away, he cries, and I have, as always, the bottle of prepared milk that I've pumped earlier ready to give him. I put the bottle nipple in his mouth, suck, suck. I've learned from lactation consultants, you don't just tip the milk into his mouth because you want him to work for it, just like he would need to on a real breast, which doesn't instantly have the milk come down. So I don't let him have the milk right away, suck, suck, and then I do this little bait and switch with him where instead of then tipping the milk into his mouth, I try one more time to stick my breast into his mouth. And he suck, but he's on to me and he refuses. And so at this point, what I always do is I get up, I put the carrier on, and I take him for a walk because it's so stressful and unsettling to have that rejection. But my friend is there, and it's still raining outside, so we just stay there in the bed. And she's just watching very peacefully. She's not judging me. She's not judging Solomon. A little while later, I try feeding him again. I offer him my breast. He refuses. I offer him the bottle. I try to bait and switch him again and offer him my breast. Again, he refuses. Again, instead of standing up and going on a walk to settle him, I just stay in the bed with my friend who's watching us with her loving eyes. A little while later, I try feeding him again. Offer him the breast, he refuses, give him the bottle, I do the bait and switch, suck, suck, looking at my friend, suck, suck, we're looking at each other, raising our eyes, suck, suck, neither one of us is saying anything, but we're both like, wow, he's still going, suck, 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 and then I feel this feeling, this rush feeling in my breast. My milk is letting down. His sucking slows down. Suck, swallow. Suck, swallow. We look at each other like, It's happening. Suck, swallow. He keeps going. Suck, these long draws, and it doesn't hurt. Keeps going. Suck, swallow. Suck, swallow. Suck, swallow. He continues, slows down, his eyes start drooping, and he falls asleep. I look over at my friend. She winks at me. Today, Solomon is 10 months old. He's pretty chunky now, and he has not used a bottle since that day. People often ask my husband and me, how's sleep going? Like sympathetically, because we're new parents. And I say, it's amazing. I've got my handsome husband on one side. I've got my little fuzzy-headed baby on the other side, and he only wakes me up 5 or 6 times a night. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I feel like we are there on that gray, rainy day in the PNW. Thank you so much. Our next storyteller is a nurse and a lactation consultant, and her most proud achievement is becoming a mom. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Crystal Wiley-Kramlich. It's getting a little weird. Sorry about that. You got this.
Can you hear me okay? Okay. All right, for today's event, I want to share a compare and contrast story of my parenthood with the 2 journeys of my children. However, I must first admit that I often tell people that if you told me this was going to be my story, or if you read it out loud to me, I just wouldn't believe it was mine. I say this because my childhood was not a fairy tale. My parents divorced when I was 8, and I then chose to be raised by my grandparents. I say that I was given that choice. For many reasons, it was the right reason and the right decision for me. Most of what I saw was what I did not want for me or my future, including the idea of having my own family. So I dreamed and sought after better, and I planned that too. I've heard of those who believe in God, that when you make plans, God laughs at them. And I will agree in this because I humored myself with the plan that I was good enough. I was humbled with divorce after a deployment from my high school sweetheart, who I'd planned a whole life with. 7 years committed and only 2 years of marriage. We never had a wedding, and I could have cared less. What I wanted was a successful relationship and to have children who had 2 loving and intact parents. I mourned the loss of my life plan. So I waited. Oh, did I wait? And I didn't just wait to be a mom. What I wanted to do was wait to be a parent. Again, I didn't care for a wedding, but I waited for the right father of my children. And by 30, I was married to Prince Charming, if you will, who insisted on a fairy tale wedding at Castle in the Clouds with a horse-drawn carriage and all. He even sang me down the aisle. I mentioned I mourned a life plan that didn't work out, and I also said if you told me the story was mine, I wouldn't believe it, and that's because my husband is more than I've ever imagined or believed possible for myself. My life, I realized, was so much better than I ever planned or dreamed of. So after marrying my Prince Charming, we didn't wait. I was pregnant a month later. So my first pregnancy, I sustained an idiopathic placental abruption around 20 weeks. Thankfully, this was a small tear. I carried my baby to 39 and 5. I woke up at midnight. I had to go to the bathroom, which I don't normally do, and I could feel the contractions. By 6:30 a.m., I told my husband, go to work. My water hasn't broke yet, and I'd let him know. But then I realized I couldn't talk, and I was in pain, and it was getting more intense. With every contraction, fluid was passing. I then went to the bathroom again, but this time I passed what I already knew as a nurse was not a good thing, and that was meconium. I went to my husband, I told him, we need to leave now. At 10:53, my son was born without further distress. I kissed that baby, and I looked at my husband, and I looked at my mom, and I said, I did it. I'm a mom. Unfortunately, more problems were being noted. My son had a cephalic hematoma from birth that we would monitor, and later that night, we found our dog decided to cross Rainbow Bridge after battling cancer. He fulfilled his purpose until the very day my son was born. That day, we not only got footprints from my son, we also got paw prints from my dog. And what a beautiful, ironic memento of two very different things. These were challenges I wasn't expecting. I certainly didn't plan them either. I really wanted to breastfeed, and we absolutely tried. We struggled with latch, and each day we tried to get it right. It seemed like it was getting more wrong. My son was constantly writhing in pain, so we checked his head. We did labs. He was starting to not eat. He wouldn't eat like they told me a newborn should. And I know that because I floated to Mother Baby as a nurse. I also worked in the nursery on the feed and grow unit, my absolute favorite place to float. So I knew something was wrong. He was crying with every intake, with every swallow. We would watch him gag, he would cough, he would turn red, he would arch. So we requested a referral to a GI specialist due to his poor feeding and growth. But because he didn't spit up and he didn't projectile vomit, it couldn't possibly be reflux. So first it had to be that I ate dairy, and I should change my diet. We should also do supplements. We should try probiotics. We should get new bottles. And of course, when that doesn't work, you should just give up breastfeeding. You should give up breast milk, and you should try formula. And not just any formula, because when that doesn't work, you try special amino acid formula. And when that doesn't work, you hope that, when that doesn't work, you start seeing a feeding specialist. You see a lactation consultant. You see a physical therapist for torticollis. You see OMT. You have a home health nurse. You have main families in your home. You get a referral to an ENT to address a minimal lip tie. You're desperate for help. We tried ranitidine, but when that didn't help, I felt near defeated. That left omeprazole. And this is where I'll tell you when they ask me, does it feel like you have a different baby now that they're on omeprazole? And I say, no, excuse me, I have the same fucking baby. He's just not in pain. It was a very long, excruciating 5 months to get to relief and to finally have my son finally feed as he should. He started to grow, he started to thrive, and I was pumping all along because I knew I was going to try breast milk again. I think I stopped counting ounces when my numbers exceeded over 200,000 mLs of pumped breast milk in my log. I said I was glad I was able to feed more than one baby because I had been donating several ounces to those who could use it. I even said at one point I could feed twins. My son and I did not choose to go back to direct breastfeeding. At that point, we finally found relief, and I finally felt like I could bond with my son in a positive way. I can tell you he successfully had breast milk until almost 15 months of age. It took me a little bit to wean down, and I had started supplementing with whole milk around 12 months. So then I waited again, because there was a pandemic going on, but I really wanted to gift my son a sibling. I really wanted to get pregnant before 35 to avoid being labeled another high-risk pregnancy. So let's just say, I looked at my husband and I said, let's just do this. And we did. And we got pregnant again. And I knew I was pregnant. I was so very nauseous, and I said, it has to be a girl this time, because I've never been this nauseous when I was with Raymond, who was my son. I had to go into my scan alone on December 18th, and I'll never forget this moment because they said, you're pregnant, and I said, I know. I've been very nauseous, I missed my period, and I'm very clearly fertile to get pregnant a second time so easily. And that's when the ultrasound tech said, there's the first heartbeat, and there's the second heartbeat. When I said earlier I could feed 2 babies, I wasn't taking that as a challenge. But here it was. I nearly passed out. Twins? Me? Are you sure? Twins? I just wasn't giving my son a sibling, but 2. Of course, I had to call my husband again immediately. explained to him that we were expecting twins, and I wasn't sure what we were going to do, because I called my mom, I called my mother-in-law, I called my grandmother, I called my cousins, my friends, trying to figure out on either family's history how this could be known, with no born twins on either side. I recall having this prevalent thought after processing all of this that if anyone was going to be able to do it, I could. I could carry twins successfully, and they were fraternal twins, in case you're all wondering. So I yet again was a high-risk pregnancy with multiple babies. The nausea, besides that nausea, I had a wonderful pregnancy. I had no complications. Other than the fact that I couldn't talk in full sentences towards the end, I grew perfectly healthy babies. On March 8th, I yet again got to call my husband, and I called my mother too, and told him that we were expecting twin girls. And of course, my husband says to me, "Happy International Women's Day." Again, I knew he married the right guy. So I got to tell my mother that I didn't just give her one granddaughter, I gave her two. She only had grandsons up to this point. On my last ultrasound, before my scheduled C-section, baby B had finally turned down. And I said, if this happens, I wanted to do this vaginally, as I did my son, so we scheduled the induction after my husband's birthday, so the girls could have their own day. I was 38 in 5 days. At 11:10, my first daughter, Victoria, the name I've always dreamed of naming my little girl since I could remember, was born. At 11:42, my second daughter, Alexandria, was born, my bonus baby girl, if you will. Beautiful and healthy baby girls, 6 pounds, 6 ounces, 6 pounds, 5 ounces. It's no NICU, nothing, we just brought them home. I was told I would struggle then with providing for my twins with breast milk. I was told I needed to buy donor breast milk before I left the hospital. I reluctantly did. I joked earlier I could feed twins, right? Well, this time I knew it and I meant it. I did use very minimal amounts of breast milk, and I was thankful for it, but I realized my supply was very sufficient. I carried my girls successfully, and I knew I could produce for them too. I ended up donating almost all the milk that I was told to purchase. I was even storing my own milk too. My girls breastfed at times for 3 months before having to go back to work as a full-time nurse during a pandemic. We found for us bottle feeding the breast milk was the best option for us. At 4 months, not even a month into daycare, one of my girls came home with a fever, and shortly after, we're all sick with COVID. My supply decreased. I got mastitis. My supply dropped. But what I'm proud to tell you is, though, even though it dropped, I was able to persevere. From exactly 4 months to 12 months, I was able to make just enough milk every day for my girls. I didn't save anything, and they had exactly as much as they needed. Despite some minimal worry, I had already overcome so much with my son that I literally doubled down when I needed to double up. I am proud to be a mom. My greatest accomplishment is a mom and my son of twins, and I still wake up every day and say, this is my story? A son, twin girls, and a loving husband? Are you sure? So if you told me I would be here telling you my story and that this would be my story, I wouldn't believe it. But here I am.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Crystal. Our next storyteller is not afraid of a challenge. She is a civil engineer, and she was the first employee at her company to ever give birth. Please join me in welcoming Kate Tillis.
Can you guys hear me okay? Is that better? Okay. I'll try. Mama. These were words I was beginning to think that I was never going to hear. I turn and I look at Gina, Teddy's speech therapist, and she says to me, "Is this the first time you've ever heard him say that?" And I said, yes. We both jumped for joy. As I'm heading to the car, I pull out my phone to call my husband and tell him Teddy has finally said mama. And I notice I have a voicemail from my doctor. And she says, so I answer it. I said, "Hi, Kate, it's Meg. I wanted to let you know that the ultrasound came back." we have undetermined lesions on your liver. We're going to send you an MRI, and if you have any questions, please call us. My heart sunk. Lesions on my liver? What? I remember thinking, how did I get here? Why is this happening to me? And why is my body failing me? And my son once again. In the fall of 2022, I found myself unexpectedly pregnant with a baby boy. I hated being pregnant. It was the worst. I vomited all the time. Morning, noon, night, middle of the night, didn't matter. Nothing made it better. I was always sick. And to top that all off, I got diagnosed with prenatal depression and anxiety. So fun. Anytime somebody would ask me, how are you doing? How is this pregnancy going? I would tell them, I hated it. I wanted it to be over. This thing just needed to be out of me. April couldn't come fast enough. I quickly learned that people didn't like that answer. Don't tell people you hate your pregnancy. They'll try to convince you otherwise. At 24 weeks, after I finally stopped getting sick, I started getting an itchy belly and an itchy back. And I had this weird right side pain. I brought it up to my doctor, and she told me that the right side pain was probably because the baby was laying transverse, and he's kicking my diaphragm, and it's probably just bruising. This is also my first child, so I'm gonna listen to what the doctor says. The itching, while it's wintertime and your belly's expanding, it's going to be itchy. At 28 weeks, I got diagnosed with gestational diabetes. While everyone else was measuring their babies compared to the size of their fruit or vegetable, I started measuring the days of my pregnancy in 4 pricks. Wake up, prick my finger, eat a gestational diabetic meal, wait 2 hours, prick, repeat. I joined gestational diabetic groups to try to learn more about this and how to manage it. I was very lucky. I got to manage it just by diet, and I didn't need insulin. But it felt very isolating being in that community when everyone else around you was using insulin. During this time, I also went to a breastfeeding class that was put on by Paula Norcott at Birth Roots, and she was the first one to tell me that, hey, because you have gestational diabetes, you might want to think about harvesting your colostrum before the baby comes. I was, what? She said, yeah, you'll want it because it'll help regulate his blood sugar and not need intervention. Well, let me tell you what, this was not on my bingo card. Picture this, hand expressing colostrum into a teaspoon on your couch while your husband takes a syringe and sucks it up into a vial to go into your fridge to bring to the hospital in a freezer bag. At 37 weeks, I found myself on my bedroom floor, incessantly itching and unable to sleep. I did the worst thing any pregnant person could do, and I opened Google. 37 weeks, excessive itching. The first result was hormones. Of course, you're pregnant. Everything itches. The second was intrahepatic cholestasis of pregnancy, also known as ICP. It's a rare liver disease that your bile is not filtered by your liver, and it goes into your bloodstream as a toxin, and it can poison your baby. Can anyone guess which one I clicked on? After reading all about this, because I needed to know everything, I woke up my husband, and I said, babe, do you think I have this? And he said, you can't have that too. But, to be on the safe side, mention it to your doctor tomorrow when you go to your doctor's. I said, okay, I can do that. So I go to the doctor's, and I tell her about my itchy palms and my itchy feet, and this time she takes my itching seriously. She says, I actually do think you have ICP, but don't Google it. And I looked at her and I said, oh, don't worry, I won't. A little white lie never hurt anybody. And she sends me off to the labs and says, don't be surprised if I call you this evening and you have to head to the hospital. 48 excruciatingly long hours later, because the lab was backed up, I finally get that phone call. I did indeed have ICP. So my husband grabs my bag of colostrum from the freezer, and off we go to the hospital. We check in, and I remind everybody, our birth plan was 1, I survive, 2, baby survives. Other than that, I don't care how we get there, just make sure we get there. They insert the cook balloon, and 12 hours later, take it out and tell me, nothing has changed. I feel like a failure, that my body again is failing my child. 36 hours later, after numerous walks around the hospital with my family and multiple pricks to my finger, I finally opt for an epidural because I just couldn't do it anymore. On April 8th, at 3:30 in the morning, alarm started going off. Nurses and doctors rush in, and my husband jumps up from the bed where he was sleeping and asks, "What's going on?" The doctors tell my husband that we've lost the baby's heartbeat. Instant panic. Then, all of a sudden, we heard his beat. The doctors reassure us that everything is fine, that the monitors probably were just being faulty, and that in a few hours, this precious little baby was going to be coming. At 10:30 in the morning, the doctors arrived and said, "We're going to do a test push." And I said, "Oh, goody." The one thing apparently my body is really good at is pushing. I pushed and that baby moved. Couldn't be more excited. So the doctor gave us the green light. I pushed, baby moved. I pushed, the baby moved. I pushed, and then everything changed. The doctor looks at me and says, "Keep pushing, no matter what. Don't stop pushing." I knew something was wrong. But I did it. I bared down, and I pushed. And then I got asked, "Can I give you an episiotomy?" I said, "Yes, you know my plan." Moments later, a gray, lifeless, not breathing child with a cord already cut was placed on my lap. They immediately moved him, and I heard the codes. And I heard the nurse say, "That baby's not breathing." My sister went with my baby, while my husband and mother stayed behind with me. What felt like a lifetime was really only 5 minutes before that baby cried. 20 minutes later, this perfect, beautiful baby boy was placed into my arms. The second best thing my body ever did for that baby, besides push him out very quickly, was that all the colostrum that I harvested was able to regulate his blood sugar without ever needing intervention from the doctors. I walked away from the hospital with more stitches than I ever could count, 2 labial tears, a double episiotomy, and hemorrhaging. I gave birth to an Apgar 2 baby that had his cord wrapped around his neck twice, born in distress, and a severely recessed jaw. But I did it. I wish I could say that the next 2 years of our lives and our journey was nothing but smooth sailing, but it wasn't. From 24 hours old, Teddy and I struggled with breastfeeding, which led to a struggle in feeding, which ultimately led us into speech therapy with Gina at Sip Swallow Speech. That in itself is a whole different journey and not a story for today, but I would personally like to today stand here and just bring recognition to Jess from Growing Littles, Paula from Maine Mothering Company, and Gina at Sip Swallow Speech, because I don't think I could be standing up here today. On top of that journey, I was diagnosed with severe postpartum depression and anxiety. At 6 weeks, my GD had cleared up, and they had reassured me that the pain in my right side and the itching on my hands and feet would eventually go away. Standing here today, I can tell you the itching has not gone away, and the pain in my side has not either. But we now know that I have a benign tumor sitting on my liver. They're unsure if it will get bigger, get smaller, or stay the same. I've learned that because I had ICP, any of my siblings that go on to have a child also have a higher rate of getting it, and my son is now a carrier for it. I've also learned that I was very lucky. Most women that develop ICP and deliver after 37 weeks, their children do not survive. On top of that, speaking of lucky, I was very lucky because I was a gold star for ICP apparently, because my parents had a long line of gallbladder disease, and if you have a lineage of gallbladder disease, you're at higher risk of developing ICP. I have a 90% chance of developing ICP, again, if I ever decide to have a baby, which means I'll never be able to carry another baby past 36 weeks or deliver vaginally. I got an amazing support group through joining Birth Roots, and I found my flock. I also joined ICP Care for postpartum, and that's been a tremendous help navigating this medical world. I stand here today for all the women that have struggled, for all the women that have not had normal pregnancies or normal birth stories, that haven't felt like they found their village because your village is ever evolving, that have felt like their bodies have failed them in ways that have been so natural for thousands of years. I stand here in front of any woman that has to take a happy pill every single day to get through the day. I see you. I'm proud of you. You're doing an amazing job, and if you ever need a listening ear, I'm gladly waiting here with a warm cup of coffee.
Our next storyteller has had two of the hardest jobs, one of which was principal of an elementary school and the other of being a mom. So please help me welcome to the stage Brittany Ray Perron.
So running a school in the middle of a pandemic was about as much fun as you think it would be. So by the end of the 2020-2021 school year, I was more than ready to be on maternity leave. I loved my job, but I was exhausted. I wanted to be at home with one little baby instead of being responsible for several hundred children. Running a school during a pandemic was the hardest thing that I had ever done until I tried to breastfeed a baby. When the pandemic first started, I reached out to my mentor and I said, "Joe, what do I do?" He said, "I've been doing this for 40 years. Nothing like this has ever happened, but you'll figure it out." And with the help of great teachers and parents and a rock star school nurse, we figured it out and we had kids in school learning. On the other hand, people had been breastfeeding babies since the dawn of time, so how hard could that be? But just to be sure, I watched every YouTube video I could find about breastfeeding. There was this one delightful Canadian midwife who just described it as cupping the breast and popping the baby on the boob. I could do that. I showed up to my scheduled C-section with a bag full of colostrum, thanks to the gestational diabetes, and I was ready to go. I told the nurse that it was very important to me that I breastfeed immediately. The fact that the baby was breech probably should have been my first sign that I wasn't going to be in control of anything, but I learned real quick. Dr. Perdue pulled my beautiful baby out, showed me her through the plastic C-section screen. They ran her over, did her vitals check, and they brought her over to me on the operating table, and I breastfed her for the very first time while they sewed my abdomen back together, and everything was going exactly as I had dreamed until it wasn't. We got back to the room and we quickly realized that the baby was not latching, and when she did latch, I wasn't giving her enough milk. We finally got her feeding, but there was 4 adults actively participating in breastfeeding one baby. My husband is pumping a syringe for the SNS system. This nurse is holding the baby's torso. The lactation consultant is manipulating her lips, and I'm providing a boob. But she was eating. But unless we were going to find 2 more adults that wanted to join our family, this was not going to be sustainable. I was very grateful to be able to receive donor milk, but I was terrified to leave the hospital because we were not going to have access to any of these supports. I remember begging the nurse for an extra set of tubing because if the one I had broke, my baby couldn't eat. When I was leaving, the lactation consultant told me that the breastfeeding support group that had been closed since the start of COVID was reopening that Tuesday. And I was so thankful for that timing. I strolled in on Tuesday, and I was the only person there, and I was grateful because I needed the sole attention of this lactation consultant. I was in the throes of triple feeding. Nobody told me the 72-hour rule. I was just going. And the pumping bra that I had ordered had come in the wrong size, so I was being held hostage about 12 times a day, holding pump parts to my breasts, unable to do anything else. My beautiful little daughter also thought that the appropriate hours to sleep were from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m., so my husband and I were overjoyed but exhausted. Gloria said, it's okay, we will figure this out together. Let's start with the weighted feed. I said, that's great. We will get some numbers. I like numbers. We will get this done. So I strip my baby down and I lay her on the scale, and she proceeds to poop everywhere. She poops on the scale. She poops on the table. She has somehow pooped on the floor, and she has pooped on the saint of a lactation consultant, Gloria. And I am horrified. But I'm also thinking, well, at least we now have an actual shit show to go with the metaphorical shit show that has been this entire experience. But thankfully, that day was a turning point. Gloria helped me figure out some solutions to help my baby latch. We talked about how I was going to approach the conversation with my doctor, that I did not want to replace breastfeeding with formula and instead come up with a plan to briefly supplement. And I kept coming back. And the next week, another mom showed up. And she was a second-time mom, so she was a genius. She knew all kinds of things I didn't know. And more importantly, she told me that things were going to get better. And so I kept coming every week, and slowly more and more moms joined the group. And every week we celebrated our baby's milestones, and we talked about the troubles that we were facing, some of which were pretty serious: mental health, partners who weren't helping, nipples that were chafing, whether or not we were returning to our jobs, babies that didn't sleep. And there was something so magical about being able to connect with a group of women who were all in that same stage of life. And then something really weird started happening. Moms would show up and start asking me questions. How do I do this? What do you do about this? And I'm thinking, why is anyone asking me things? I don't know what I'm doing. But then I realized that I did know what I was doing. It was becoming easier. And so by that point, I didn't really need as much breastfeeding support, but I could go and be the support to someone else. When a new mom came in tears and miserable, I could say, hey, it was exactly like that for me, and now it's better. And by the time May rolled around, we celebrated my baby's first birthday with this breastfeeding group in a hospital conference room with her first little best friends, 6 feet apart, all the adults wearing masks. And it was amazing to think that we had made it to 1 year of breastfeeding when at one point it didn't seem like we were going to make it through the first week. At that same time, we received the very upsetting news that the hospital's maternity services were being closed and that all lactation services would be ended. And by that point, I didn't need help with breastfeeding, but my heart was breaking for the moms who had just had their babies, who no longer had access to support, and would never get to be a part of this beautiful community that we had built. And it seems like this is happening more and more. Every few weeks, I hear a new announcement of a service closing, which is exactly the opposite of what families need. Thankfully for me, the bonds of this group have far outlived the time that we were there. It was magical to get to be there from the very first day of the group until the very end. And last week, I attended a baby shower for one of the moms who's expecting her second. And in 2 weeks, many of those little babies will be running around in my backyard as we celebrate my baby's 4th birthday. And between my 2 children, I will also be reaching a milestone of 4 years of breastfeeding, which truly seemed impossible at the beginning. And so just like running a school in the middle of a pandemic, I figured it out with the help of a community. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely fantastic. Our next storyteller has a PhD in organizational change and is very active in her community in Herman. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Lisa Rancourt.
Thank you. So science tells us that a woman is born with all of the eggs that she will ever produce when she's born. So I like to think of in that way we are connected to our maternal grandmothers. In my family, the women have always supported each other. They've been there. So when my grandmother had my mom in the late 40s, a tiny little part of me was there, I like to think. And when my mom had her babies in the late 70s, my grandmother was there, and I was there eventually. And so they mean a lot to me, my parents, and they've always been very modest and very traditional in their family roles. And that was pretty much the way I was going until we moved to Europe when I was 11. And all of a sudden, we had a new language and a new culture. And we would go to the parks, and I was really into hiking and even skiing. And I'd see these mothers of my friends. They had little siblings, and if a child fell, it was almost natural that the child would find the mother, and they'd begin to nurse, and the child would barely even cry. And I said, "What is this?" I had never seen anything like that before. Where I came from, babies cried, and there were bottles, and it was a lot of work, and I was not interested in babysitting. So I saw that, and I thought that was really wonderful. And my mom and my grandmother still were very active in my life, and they were so happy when I took the traditional role and I got married right after college. When my husband was done with law school, we got married, and immediately they started saying, "Where are the babies?" But I wasn't ready yet. I liked this long time. So my husband and I were together, married for over 9 years before I started thinking about having my first child. And when I started thinking about it, I made a plan, because that's what I wanted to do. I did a little bit of research, and I said, "Oh, great, natural childbirth, breastfeeding, tick, tick. All right, birth plan, go to the hospital." I had a great pregnancy. I was very healthy. I had even on my birth plan that I wanted to swim the day before he was born and do a Zumba class, because I wouldn't be able to do that for a while. And I did. Unfortunately, that plan, as soon as I went to the hospital, kind of went right out the window. And after about 30 hours of labor, my son was born via C-section. He was very healthy. But that wasn't according to plan. He was born about 9 20 on a Friday night, and they immediately took him to go get him checked up, and they took me and put me in a room and started talking about the bills and how we're going to pay for it. And I remember I was really cold, and I kept saying, well, where's my baby? And by the way, where'd that husband go? He left with the baby to go get checked up. And so it was after midnight by the time they brought Alex, that's my oldest, in to meet me, and they'd already given him a bottle. So immediately I was disappointed. I wanted to nurse my child, and they said, oh, he took formula like a champ. This is what we gave him. Here's some samples. And I said, well, I wanted to breastfeed. It's on the plan. And so we tried. My mom was in the room. She'd gone home in the middle of 30 hours of labor, but she came back, and she said, oh, honey, it's okay, because I was crying because it hadn't gone the way I wanted. And she went to Target and bought all kinds of bottles because the plan had been to breastfeed, but the plan's gone. So she bought, I think, every single one they had, and probably a whole variety of formula. And she met us back at the house because he was great. He was healthy. We went home. I had made a plan, but I didn't really know anything about breastfeeding. And my mom didn't know anything about breastfeeding. And I was like, Mom, I really want to try breastfeeding. And she's like, okay. Well, I'll just get a bottle ready just in case. And I was like, no, Mom, I got to try this. And the book says, and the internet says to try this. So I was reading books and learning from the internet. And it was really hard. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to hold him. I didn't know if it was working. I didn't know if he was getting anything. And I saw on the internet that La Leche League was meeting on Wednesday. So this is Sunday. We're at home. I have no idea if I'm feeding my baby or starving him or anything. I told my mom, you can help me. You can bring me to La Leche League on Wednesday, and it's downtown in some random church. And she's like, okay. And so she drove me there, and she waited in the car. And she's thinking all this time, how can I help my daughter? This is the first grandchild. We've waited so long. They were married for 9 years. Well, she can go to this meeting, and maybe they'll figure it out. So I go into this meeting, and the first thing they say is, you're doing great. And I'm like, really? This is what this is supposed to be? And they're like, you're doing great. Just keep going. And I was like, well, what about these breast pumps? Am I supposed to get one of those? Am I supposed to do something with that? And they're like, you don't really have to. You can. And then my mom texted me, and she's like, are you done yet? And I was like, it'd only been like 5 minutes. But I said, I'll be out in a minute. And so I'm leaving with my baby, and this lady's following me out, and she's got brochures, because I kind of mentioned my mom wasn't so into it. And so she had one on the benefits of breastfeeding. She handed it to my mom, and my mom actually read it. And she said, okay, but I can't be involved if you're breastfeeding. So I hadn't realized what that was, but eventually Alex was really healthy. He loved breastfeeding. He hated bottles, so he told Grandma that wasn't going to work. And so instead, my mom and my grandma made me a new wardrobe. So they literally set up sewing machines in my kitchen, and while I would nurse, they would show me patterns and design clothes for me. And I just realized that today, that I chose 12 years later an outfit that my grandmother and my mom had made for me after my first born. So after having a wonderful experience, I didn't just breastfeed, I dove into it. I changed my thesis for my doctorate and started writing about women breastfeeding in the workplace, because it wasn't enough to just do it. And then my little son, he liked to play superheroes, and one day he asked for a sidekick. And so I said, sure, this is my chance to do it right? I made a new birth plan. I wanted to have a VBAC, and I wanted to breastfeed. But plans, they don't go the way that you're expecting. And on May 18th, 2015, I got a phone call from the wonderful new doctor that I'd found that had agreed to let me do a VBAC. I was going to be 35 when he was born. I was 34. But I got a phone call from their office, and I was in the backyard with my son, and he was picking dandelions, and blowing them, and it was beautiful. And I answered the phone, and the receptionist on the phone said, it's a boy, but he has Down syndrome. And my first thought was, wait, the plan said I didn't want to know the gender. I certainly didn't want to know the gender without my husband and on the phone. And then it hit me, Down syndrome. I had never said those words out loud before. So I called my husband, and then I called my mom. And my mom was so supportive. All of a sudden, all her years of teaching came out, and she said, they're the best. And I said, I've never met anybody with Down syndrome. But then in the way that my mom is, as soon as I'd hung up the phone, she accidentally texted me instead of my sister and said, your sister's baby, and she used a euphemism that I'm not going to use. And so that kind of took all the support away. But they immediately scheduled me for more tests. I didn't know what they were. I kind of thought they were going to fix it. Like, we'll go in there and they'll fix it, but they wanted tests, like invasive tests. And when I said no, they said, okay, you're high risk, go to Portland. I live all the way up near Bangor. So for the rest of my pregnancy, I drove to Portland at least once a week. They scanned me. I remember they measured his pinky so much. I remember, why are they measuring his pinky? They counted, they were looking for signs of Down syndrome. They never found any. They didn't find any signs. But I was high risk because of him. And on my 38th week, I was getting an ultrasound. And I'd been in a really bad mood that day. I was picking fights with everyone. At this point, I'm still nursing my oldest. So my 3-year-old is sitting on between my legs. I'm having an ultrasound. And the aide says, I'll be right back. And she goes and gets the doctor. And the doctor comes in and says, you're in labor. Would you like to have your baby today? Completely forgot what that felt like. You'd think after 30 hours you'd have some kind of idea of what that felt like. And so I told you my plan was to have a VBAC and to nurse. Somehow, being in labor, they said, you're in labor, you could do a VBAC. And at that point, I just wanted my baby. I wanted my healthy baby. I said, let's do a C-section. So we did a C-section. Unfortunately, it was Friday night, around 3 in the morning this time. Lactation consultants don't work on the weekends. And as soon as he was born, I knew he had Down syndrome. And I remember the doctor was like, no, wait, we'll wait for the tests. And I said, okay, he has Down syndrome. And I held him, and he was beautiful, and he didn't have to go to the NICU. And he was perfect. And the next morning, the doctor came in, and I pretended I was sleeping. It's kind of a weird thing. I didn't want to deal with it. And so my mom was there, and my husband was there, and Andy was sleeping, and so I pretended to sleep too. And the doctor told my mom and my husband that the baby had Down syndrome. And so I just pretended to be asleep. And then they said, because he has Down syndrome, we're going to take him to get his heart checked out. And I remember thinking, well, I make healthy babies. And my oldest had never even really had a cold. I was so lucky. I didn't go. Instead, I decided to have that, if you've ever had a C-section, that really fun shower after the C-section. I did that instead of going to his heart exam. And when I was getting out of the shower, my husband came back, and he was pushing Andy in the little stroller thing, the box that they have. And there was a new doctor with him, and my husband was white and sweaty. And the new doctor said, whatever his name was, I don't remember. And he said, your baby is going to go into heart failure. He will need open heart surgery if you choose to do that. I will come back later. And he left. And I was like, what does that mean if I choose to do that? I didn't have much time to think about it because in come a bunch of nurses. And they don't come in empty-handed. They came in with formula and bottles, and because he had also been given formula, because I don't know, I'm not a very good advocate after I've had major surgery. But I wasn't panicked about it because it all worked out with Alex. So he'd been given formula. But I was still nursing Alex, so I had no fear that I wasn't going to have enough milk. I'd also donated over 45 gallons of milk with Alex. So I was a supplier. I had this down. The nurses came in. They had tubes. They had bottles. They had formula. And I said, did you see the plan? I'm going to breastfeed. And they said, oh, no, no, no. Down's babies don't breastfeed. And I said, really? Well, I've been giving him like drops of milk, and he seems to be doing okay. So we're just going to keep doing that. So I asked for a breast pump, and they said they'd look for one. But in the meantime, I was able to express and give him drops of breast milk, and he was doing really well. We were able to leave the hospital without those tubes, without the special needs bottles, just me and him. And we had 2 glorious weeks together before he went into heart failure, because the doctor was right. He went into heart failure, and we went back to the hospital. We went up in Bangor to the hospital, and they said, he has not regained his birth weight. He is not gaining weight. You are not producing enough milk for him. And I knew that wasn't right, because I was still pumping, and I had plenty of milk. He needs to have his milk fortified, so he has to drink less to have more calories. Okay, well, we can do that. So we left with a supplemental nursing system that would put formula with the breast milk and give it to him, and special needs bottles where you just like push it so that he doesn't really have to suck. But he was pretty good at sucking anyway, but I did what they wanted. 2 weeks later, he still hadn't gained any weight. He wasn't thriving. He had failure to thrive. Despite, I had all this milk, and he just couldn't get it. A weird thing, Bangor doesn't let you leave the hospital, or they didn't in 2015, with a nasal gastric tube. You'd have to have the surgery to have a tube put in his stomach. I didn't want to do that. I knew this baby would also already have to have surgeries, so we checked out against doctor's orders, drove to Portland, checked back in, learned about nasogastric tubes, and then checked out and drove back to Bangor with 2 tubes. Now, my baby Andy, one thing I wished for before he was born is that he would be a good sleeper, because my older son, not a good sleeper. So Andy, at this point, it's like December, January, he's sleeping about 23 and a half hours a day. And those other 30 minutes are broken up. And I promise you, every moment he was awake, he was trying to get that nasal tube out. And he succeeded a lot. And I learned how to put that back in. I actually watched a YouTube video, and it took me a couple years to tell my husband that that's how I learned how to do that. He was not so impressed. They tried to show me in Portland, and when I put it in him the first time, it came out of his mouth, and I screamed. So then I didn't want to practice again, but then when we went home, it happened. I watched a YouTube video, and I did it, and I felt, you listen, and you hear the little bubble, and you know it's in the right place. And then I fed him, and I kind of held my breath, but I did it. And so our journey was very different than with my older son. By this time, my grandmother had passed away, and my mom was down in Florida. But she kept asking, what can I do to help? She had been there when he was born, but she flew back, I think 3 days later, sometime in that honeymoon period. She got to hug and kiss him. She knew I would nurse him, and she'd see him in the summer. In January, she kept asking, what can I do to help? And I didn't know. We kept getting in and out of the hospital, and one time I was in the hospital, and I got a notice on my phone that there was a delivery at my door. Okay. I called my neighbor and said, just let him put it inside or something. And my neighbor called back, and she's like, it's a bed. Where do you want it? And I'm like, what? And she's like, it's from your mom. So I call my mom up, and she's like, it's a bed for me. I'm moving in. So we're in our starter home, and my mom puts her twin bed right up next to the crib. So it's door, crib, my mom's bed, the oxygen, the supplemental feeding system, because at this point, if we were home, he was on 24-hour feeds, and my mom. And my mom read the manual on how to feed him with the Joey thing. My mom is in her 60s at that time, and she figured it out. She was a champion of that. She also helped take care of my 3-year-old and really helped us get through that. And she was the biggest supporter of breastfeeding, which was very strange, because I thought for sure she would be sneaking in more of the formula and not the breast milk, but she was like, she was so strict about the breast milk, you know? She was like, can't we just get some more fresh instead of having to use this frozen stuff? She became really strict about that. But she was wonderful, and Andy changed our whole family. On February 14th of 2016, we went back to the hospital, Valentine's Day, and the doctor said he's not leaving until he has his open heart surgery. So he had it on February 17th. His heart was stopped for 45 minutes, which I didn't know they were going to do that because I didn't read that book until the night before. That was a long night. I didn't know they have to stop his heart in order to patch up the holes. You'd think having a PhD, I'd know a little bit more. No idea. Sometimes I think you're protected by what you don't know. And his surgery was a monumental success. He had his surgery on a Thursday. By Monday, we were out of intensive care. We went home on a Wednesday, and by the following Wednesday, he'd rolled over. I called the doctor because I said, "You told me not to put him on his stomach, and he's rolling over." And he said, "Well, I guess he's okay. He's not going to hurt himself." Now, this is a baby that had only really been awake for maybe 15 or 20 minutes at any one period. He didn't even weigh 10 pounds. So to have him, well, he probably weighed like 12 or 13. He really took off with the breastfeeding after he had his open heart surgery. The nurses in the cardiac ward were really surprised that we brought breast milk and I brought a pump and that I was pumping in the NICU for him. They were very surprised with that, but they had not a good system of keeping track of milk. They kept saying I was out of milk, and I was like, really? So I kept pumping, and when I left the hospital, my husband had to go buy an extra cooler. We had 3 huge coolers in the back of our car full of milk, and we left quite a bit at the hospital to donate as well. So we left the hospital in February, and my son never took another bottle. He never used any of that milk. I donated it all. He never had to use supplemental feedings or a special nipple again. By 11 months, he was sitting up. He was cruising at a year. He was walking at 13 or 14 months. Yes, he has Down syndrome. He also has hearing loss that we didn't know about for a really long time. But he has been a special addition to our family that we didn't even know we needed, and he has brought my 2 sons so close together. My older son also has a speech delay and didn't talk very much at 3. He now has a stutter, and they can sign to each other. It's funny because my little boy Andy is more receptive in his signing, but he signs to Alex, who's 12, and he's very receptive in Andy signing. He knows Andy language. So they have a beautiful relationship, and my mom learned how to be supportive of me in a way that didn't just involve my wardrobe. It involved moving into my house, and sometimes, parents, they just need to do for their kids, and giving my mom specific ways that she could help has been really wonderful. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That was incredible. Our final storyteller tonight has been caring for moms and babies for many years as a postpartum doula, as a nurse, and as a lactation consultant. I'm honored to welcome to the stage Erin Kirkpatrick.
I stopped keeping track of the number of women I had supported during their labor and birth when I hit 500. I had my dream job as a labor and delivery nurse, and I was good at it. My mother was one of 5 girls, and between them they had 10 girls, and we were a matriarchal family that believed in the power of the female body and the sanctity of birth and the vitality of breastfeeding. While some girls imagined their dream wedding and planning it to the tiniest detail, I envisioned my labor and the birth of my child. My friends had posters of NSYNC and Backstreet Boys on the wall, and I had a giant poster of a fully pregnant woman in all her glory. And yes, people that came over thought that was weird. When I was 24, I married my wonderful husband and did have a fabulous wedding. And when I was 29, I got pregnant with our first child. My cousin Elise called me the next week and said she too was pregnant. And our plan of going through pregnancy and parenthood together, like our mothers had with us, seemed to be coming true. I actually had 6 good friends that were pregnant at the same time. And I remember I said to one of them, statistically speaking, one of us is not going to have a baby. I didn't think it was going to be me. My son Abel stopped growing at 10 weeks. And the aftermath of that for me is a different story. My cousin Elise went into labor around 39 weeks in her pregnancy, and I supported her with everything I could in her amazing, beautiful home birth, which maybe you've seen snippets of if you've seen the documentary No One Told Me. Her daughter was everything we'd both dreamed of. After all 6 of my friends had their babies and I felt ready, we tried again, and I got pregnant with our second child. But this pregnancy was filled with fear, and I felt very certain this baby was not going to live either, especially after another round of friends and colleagues also became pregnant. But when I hit 34 weeks, I started thinking, well, even if they were born now, they'd probably be okay. I'd seen plenty of babies born early and spend some time in the NICU and go home healthy. So my husband set the crib up. And finally, after 38 and a half long weeks of horrible nausea and anxiety, I breathed a sigh of relief and I let myself believe we're gonna bring this baby home. And I put a car seat in the car. And on July 29th, 2019, I went into labor. I started having contractions and I called my husband at work and I called my cousin Ellie, who was gonna be my labor doula this time. If you're interested in the details of the next 3 days of my life, you could listen to episode 66 on a wonderful podcast called Still a Part of Us. And that's the podcast where parents get to tell their story of their stillbirth. And I was interviewed on that podcast because our son Henry had died inside of me the night before my contractions started. And he was not alive at the time of his birth. I laid on a triage bed where I had reassured so many women before me, on a unit with my colleagues and friends waiting right outside the door. And the midwife that I trusted with my life said the 5 words to me that I'll never forget, the words that are a core piece of who I am now. The heart is not beating. After the death of my son, so many things about me changed. I feel like my nervous system has been irreparably damaged. Stress puts me so easily into fight, flight, or freeze mode. It seems like my body is like the world is a dangerous place and I have to be on high alert at all times. So I get overstimulated and overwhelmed really easily. My brain starts to panic, and sometimes it feels impossible to speak or move. I need so much more sleep than I used to. Sometimes I feel like I have a chronic illness that just can flare up at any time. Once I said to my husband, I'd rather be paralyzed because then people could see what a struggle my life feels like, how limited I feel, and there'd be a visible reason for it. I've had to really limit social interactions. This night is unusual for me. And I can't help people as much as I used to. And I haven't been able to go back to caring for laboring women. And that makes me really sad. I feel like I've lost a lot of parts of who I used to be, parts that I loved. And for many years, I've felt like I've been forced to live this life trapped in a person I barely recognize. However, this unfamiliar person has developed an important ability that the old me was not very good at, and that's taking care of me. I've learned how to show myself compassion and understanding and how to be gentle with myself. I've learned the value of rest and that my worth as a human is not connected to my productivity. I've learned how to say no. I've ended some toxic relationships. I've worked very hard with a fabulous therapist for many hours and practice every day the skills she's taught me. I've learned how to let someone else take care of me and to practice feeling gratitude instead of guilt for that. I've learned how to sit with very uncomfortable, painful emotions and not rush them away with distraction. And that even if you think a feeling is going to last forever, that doesn't mean it will. Even after a wildfire devastates a landscape, new beautiful things can grow. And for me, a beautiful little flower began growing in the charred landscape of my life the day after Henry was born, when someone said to me, "What do you want to do about your breast milk?" For a lot of women in that situation, their milk coming in would be a really painful reminder of the loss they had experienced, and we teach women how to make their milk go away after that happens. But for me, it felt like a precious opportunity to salvage something from this wreckage, and I knew immediately I wanted to pump my milk. Over the next few days, I watched milk, the color of golden sunshine, flow out of my body, and it felt like a visible representation of my love for my son. I felt so connected to him in those moments. And a friend told me about a family nearby that had had twins just a couple days after Henry was born, and the mom wasn't yet making enough milk for both of them, so I pumped my milk for 6 weeks and I gave it to that family, and I felt really good about that. After I stopped pumping, I could still easily hand express milk or use my hand to get drops of milk out, and every day in the shower I would check and see if the milk was still there. And every day it was, and it was so comforting to me. And after a few months, I had the thought, I hope the milk stays until I have another baby and can nurse them from my body. In 2020, I got pregnant with our third child, and of course, by that point, joy was not a part of pregnancy. I had been robbed of the naive certainty of an outcome just because the child has been conceived. And I always thought it was so strange that people would announce their pregnancy and say, "We're going to have a baby." You don't know that, I always thought. But I'm very happy to say that in October 2020, our precious daughter, Hattie Ruth, was born, surrounded by all the same people that had taken care of me and Henry during his birth. Everyone was sobbing, except for me. I was definitely in a state of shock, just holding this pink wiggling baby. But 2 days later, we got home from the hospital. I'm sitting on the couch, and I'm comfortably nursing my daughter, and I realized the milk had stayed. That precious connection between Henry and Hattie had been preserved within my body. They were both my children, but Hattie was here, and I loved her. And the relief that came with that realization felt like it loosened the grip of 3 years of fear and anxiety that had been tightly wrapped around me. I sobbed as I looked down at her, and she pulled off my breast, and my milk sprayed across her face. And she looked up at me with this look like she was in love with me too. And in the very next instant, I felt sadness that Henry wasn't here, that Henry wasn't this baby. And I learned that we can hold joy and grief within us at the same time for the same event. And that has been a really powerful lesson of motherhood for me. Hattie and I had a beautiful breastfeeding journey of 2.5 years, and when I weaned her, I took a little bit of milk that I had saved from right after she was born, and I took a little bit of milk that I had saved from right after Henry was born, his first milk, and I wrote to a jewelry maker, and I told her our story, and I sent her the milk, and I had this ring made, one circle with Henry's milk and one circle with Hattie's milk. And I look at this ring and I feel grateful for my children and grateful for my body's ability to make milk and grateful that I had access to the resources I needed to stay alive so that my story didn't end in 2019. I still don't know how to answer when someone asks me how many children you have, and I know I'll never be that person I was before that first pregnancy, but now I have the privilege of helping women in their postpartum period of life learn how to hold space for and express all the emotions that come with motherhood, all of them. The journey to parenthood and through it changes us in ways that we wanted and hoped for, and ways that we never imagined and are hard to accept. But I strongly believe in the power of sharing our stories with each other as we go through this process. So I thank you very much for listening to mine.
There's nowhere we can go from here. Thank you so much, everybody. And please join me in welcoming our storytellers back on the stage one last time for a huge round of applause.